They said silence was peace. They lied. Silence is judgment. It's the sound that follows when the world decides you're no longer worth listening. You stand there, not in battle, not in chaos, but in the kind of stillness that strips a man of his name. Eyes fix on you like a firing squad that doesn't need bullets. You try to speak, but words die in your throat because deep down, you know it. They're right. You failed. You built something with your hands, your pride, your hunger, and watched it crumble while everyone else watched too. You didn't just lose. You became the lesson others whisper about when you're gone. There was a time your name carried weight, a name people said with expectation, with envy. But now, it's spoken like a warning. A ghost of who you were still haunts the corridors where your laughter used to echo. You replay the moments like film cuts, the handshake that meant betrayal, the friend who smiled while sharpening the knife, the lover who promised forever then turned you into a memory. You don't break all at once, you erode quietly, piece by piece, until the person looking back at you in the mirror feels like a witness, not a participant. The room that once held your victory now feels like a tomb. The lights hum with quiet pity. Your achievements hang like relics from a past life. Trophies dulled, screens dark, applause gone. It's strange how the world doesn't end with thunder. It ends with silence. No storm, no fire, just absence. The kind that eats at your sanity because you realize noise was mercy. At least when people shouted, you mattered. Now they don't even bother. And that hurts more than hate ever could. You scroll through your old messages, the ones that said proud of you, the ones that felt eternal, and suddenly, every word feels like mockery. The same hands that once reached for you now stay folded. The same mouths that praised you now speak in hushed tones. Failure isn't loud, it's suffocatingly quiet. It's when the calls stop, when no one checks in, when your presence becomes background static in lives that moved on. But in that silence, something ancient begins to stir. Beneath humiliation, beneath the ashes of pride, there's a whisper, faint but unmistakable. You've heard it before. Long ago, when you were still naive enough to think you were invincible. It says, good, now you see. Because only in ruin do you finally understand what's real, not the applause, not the followers, not the illusions of control. What's real is the raw self, the one stripped of masks, standing alone in the aftermath. The silence doesn't feel like defeat anymore. It feels like truth, a mirror forcing you to face what you've avoided. You were addicted to noise, validation, attention, movement. You thought power came from seen. But now you realize, power is in being unshakable when seen. They think you're fit. Let them. Every downfall is a disguise, every exile a rebirth in progress. The lion doesn't roar in the dark, it watches, it waits. You don't need to prove them wrong. You need to remember who you were before the world convinced you to perform. You inhale, and for the first time the air doesn't choke you, it cleanses you. You understand something terrifying and liberating. They can take everything, but they cannot take the silence you've learned to command. And so you stand there, in the same room that once sentenced you, calm, still, unbroken. You say nothing, because now you know the most dangerous man in the room is the one who's already been destroyed and came back carrying silence like a weapon. The world doesn't end with fire or scream. It ends quietly, when no one notices you fading. You wake up one morning and realize the world kept moving while you stood still. The messages stopped. The faces disappeared. You scroll through their lives, and it's as if you never existed. That's how darkness, not as a storm, but as absence of purpose, absence of sound, absence of anyone who cared enough to ask if you're okay. You used to be surrounded by noise, attention, validation. Now all you hear is the low hum of your own breath, trapped in a room that feels smaller each day. The silence becomes your only witness. You think about the betrayal, not just from others, but from yourself. You built everything on borrowed approval. You performed strength for people who never showed up when you fell. Every word you spoke was a negotiation to stay light, to stay seen. And when they left, they took your reflection with them. Now the mirror doesn't recognize. You see the outline of someone who tried too hard to be perfect and forgot how to be real. The light in your eyes? Gone. You've been edited out of your own story, pixel by pixel, until nothing remains but the quiet ache of being forgotten. Nights feel longer now. You stay awake staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks that look like maps. The mind turns cruel when it's left alone too. It replays every failure in high definition, every mistake in slow motion. You start to wonder if this is punishment or initiation. Maybe pain isn't here to destroy you. Maybe it's here to strip you down to what's real. You can't tell anymore if you're breaking or the line between the two has vanished. All that remains is the rhythm of your heartbeat, steady, stubborn, unwilling to quit. There's a strange power in losing everything. It exposes what was fake. You stop pretending, you stop chasing, you start watching how people move, how they lie with smiles, how the world applauds masks but fears truth. You begin to see motives in every word, shadows behind every handshake. You stop reacting, you start studying. That's when you realize the real war was never against them. It was against your own dependence, the need to be understood, to be chosen, to be loved by those who only valued you. The darkness teaches you restraint. You no longer speak to fill the air. You listen, you observe, you calculate. You learn to disappear strategically, not as a victim, but as a phantom moving through noise. The version of you that begged for validation is gone. What's left is someone quieter, colder, deliberate. You start to understand ancient truths. That silence was never weakness, it was weaponry. Empires fell because someone misread silence as surrender. They always do. You used to fear this isolation. Now it feels sacred. You walk through it like a temple of shadows, and every step echoes with discipline. The pain that once paralyzed you now trains you. The rejection that once burned now refines. You don't chase light anymore. You become it. Slow, steady, unbothered. The world still spins, unaware of what it created. They think you vanished, but you're still here. Quieter, stronger, hidden in plain sight, because the greatest transformations don't make noise. They happen in silence, where the weak break and the patient rise. It doesn't start with a sunrise. It starts in the middle of the night, when your reflection looks back at you and doesn't even flinch anymore. You've cried everything you could, shattered every illusion. The silence isn't painful now, it's instructive. You finally hear it whisper the truth you've been running from. No one is coming. Not the ones who promised they'd never leave. Not the ones who said they believed in you. Not even the version of yourself that you keep pretending is still alive. The silence is all that's left, and in it, something ancient begins to stir. You stand there, surrounded by everything that once defined you. Messages unsent, dreams unspoken, hopes half buried under routine. You see your own hands trembling, but this time you don't look away. You study them like they belong to a stranger, because they do. The old you, the one that begged for understanding, that tried to prove worth, is gone. What's left isn't desperate, it's danger. There's a calm kind of rage that replaces, and it doesn't scream. It studies, it plans, it waits. You start to see patterns in the pain. Every betrayal wasn't random, it was a lesson written in code. Every rejection carved a new edge, and you realize the universe never punished you. It trained you, stripped you of everything soft, everything dependent, everything weak. You used to see pain as cruelty. Now you see it as craftsmanship, sculpting you into something cold, clear, and deliberate. The noise of the world fades into static. All that remains is the pulse under your skin, steady and sharp like a war drum waiting for its cue. You rise slowly, not with the arrogance of someone healed, but with the precision of someone reborn. Your movements are small, a notebook open, a light flickers on. You start to move with intent. You no longer ask, why me? You ask, what now? You no longer wait for timing. You create it. The spark doesn't come from outside. It's pulled from the ashes of every humiliation, every silence you once feared. It burns low and quiet, the kind of fire that doesn't seek attention, only transformation. There's a strange satisfaction in the discipline that follows. The world doesn't notice, but you don't need it to. You rise earlier, move quieter, you say less. You listen to your own breath like it's a code of survival. Each day becomes a ritual, not of hope, but of proof. The pain you once avoided becomes your pulse. The loneliness you once despised becomes your clarity. You're no longer chasing light, you've become it, refracted through scars that no longer ache but instruct. When people see you now, they can't name what's changed. They sense it, the distance, the weight, the silence that feels heavier than words. You no longer need to defend your story. You are your story. And those who once pitied you start to fear you, because resilience spoken softly is louder than all their noise combined. You don't crave revenge, you crave precision. You move like someone who has already seen the ending and is rewriting it anyway. And as the night folds into itself, you realize something unshakable. You were never broken. You were being emptied, so something uncorruptible could take its place. The world doesn't need to see it yet. Let them sleep. Let them talk. Let them get. You'll stay here, in the dark, where the real work happens, where silence becomes your armor and pain becomes your blueprint. Because from this point on, every step you take will sound like thunder to those who once mistook your quiet for surrender. No one sees you now. No audience, no applause. Just the sound of your own breathing in an empty room where failure still echoes like a curse. The world has already moved on, convinced you're done. They've rewritten your story without asking for your permission, but you don't argue. You let them believe. Because this time, you're not chasing their attention, you're building something they won't understand, and the climb doesn't start with a roar. It begins in silence, in the repetition, in the thousand invisible moments where no one's watching but the walls that witnessed your fall. You wake before the sun because it's the only time the world doesn't demand anything from you. The air feels ancient, like it remembers every vow ever broken by a wind. You stretch your hands, the same hands that once trembled, and begin again. The body resists, but the mind has become a weapon now, sharpened by pain, cooled by time. You learn to love the resistance. Each struggle feels less like punishment, more like initiation. You're not improving, you're transforming. Every drop of sweat is an offering to the version of you that refused to die when everyone else walked away. You don't speak much anymore. Words feel cheap compared to the silence you've learned to command. Silence, once your prison, is now your ally. You use it like armor, like a blade. The same people who mocked you for your stillness now drown in noise, chasing relevance while you study patterns, weaknesses, human behavior. You're not just rebuilding yourself, you're decoding the system that broke you. Every betrayal becomes data, every rejection a cipher. You start to see the hidden architecture behind power, the quiet discipline, the ruthless patience. You realize that greatness isn't born in light, it's forged in the dark corridors of isolation. Time no longer feels linear. Days blur into lessons, pain turns into patterns, and you start seeing symbols everywhere. Mirrors, serpents, ash. The serpent, once feared, now makes sense. It sheds its skin to survive. It doesn't mourn the old form. It discards it without hesitation. You understand now, transformation isn't about becoming something new. It's about killing what refuses to evolve. So you let parts of yourself die. The soft, naive, approval-hungry version of you. You bury him quietly. You don't eulogize. You simply move on. The climb changes your posture. Your eyes harden, but your vision clears. You walk differently, not faster but heavier, like you carry something sacred. You no longer chase outcome. You study process. The noise of ambition fades, replaced by rhythm. You begin to see how the powerful move, not loudly, but deliberately. They speak less, but every word lands like stone. You learn to conserve energy, to observe, to wait. Every setback becomes strategy in disguise. You're not desperate anymore, you're danger. There are moments when exhaustion whispers for you to stop, but you've already gone too far. You've buried too many versions of yourself to turn back now. The climb isn't about reaching something above. It's about descending deeper into what's real. The mountain isn't outside you, it's within. And every inch you ascend, another illusion collapses. You stop fearing failure because you've realized the truth. Failure is just a mirror showing you who still needs to burn. Now when you pass the same streets, the same faces that once watched you break, they look at you differently. They can't explain it, but they feel it. An unspoken gravity around you. You've mastered what they never will, the discipline of silence, the art of becoming unrecognizable. You're not seeking revenge. You're not even seeking victory. You're seeking control. And control, you've learned, doesn't come from power over others. It comes from absolute dominion over yourself. That's the climb. That's the secret. You stopped waiting for the applause. You stopped explaining the world had already made its judgment, and so you let them. You disappeared, not out of defeat, but calculation. Because silence, when chosen, becomes strategy. While they laughed at your stillness, you were rebuilding something far stronger than approval. Precision. You studied what broke you, dissected it piece by piece, and turned every shattered edge into a weapon. You learned that the greatest comebacks don't start with noise. They begin with the quiet sharpening of intent. At first, your hands still shook. Doubt lingered like smoke in an empty room, but repetition forged ritual. Discipline became your only prayer. There was no lightning moment of clarity, only the slow, suffocating process of becoming immune to. Every sleepless night carved new edges into your mind. You learned to hold hunger in your chest without letting it turn to rage. You learned to be ignored without needing to be seen. The world didn't owe you its attention, and that realization burned away everything fragile left inside you. You stopped chasing opportunities. You began to build them. You studied patterns, how people spoke, how power moved, how silence unsettled those addicted to noise. You understood what few dare to admit. Power isn't about being the loudest. It's about being the one who doesn't flinch when the room turns silent. While others tried to dominate attention, you mastered the art of withholding it. Every interaction became a test. Every failure became an archive. You were no longer reacting, you were observing, collecting data from chaos. There were nights when betrayal replayed in your mind like an unfinished symphony. Every face that doubted you, every word that cut, they became sigils carved into your memory. Not wounds, but reminders. You didn't want revenge, you wanted evolution. You began to move like someone who had seen too much truth to ever be naive again. The old, you would have begged to be understood. The new, you simply watched. Unbothered, unreadable, untouchable. You were no longer trying to rise above anyone. You were trying to rise above yourself. And that's when the shift happened. Not loud, not dramatic, but seismic. You realized that greatness isn't an explosion, it's erosion. It's the quiet wearing away of everything weak until only the core remains. You began to notice small changes, focus lasting longer, emotions no longer ruling your action, setbacks no longer breaking rhythm. You became surgical, precise, detached in a way that frightened those who once pitied you. The people who underestimated you started sensing something they couldn't define, the presence of someone who doesn't seek control but embodies it. You walked differently now, slower, deliberate, as if time itself had shifted allegiance. You no longer needed to announce your return. You didn't crave closure. Your scars had become language, your silence a statement. The world that once dismissed you began to mirror your pace, your tone, restraint. You didn't rise suddenly, you simply stopped falling. What they mistook for stillness was evolution happening beneath the surface. Now when they see you, they feel something ancient, not arrogance, not vengeance, but power wrapped in calm. You become the embodiment of what they fear most, someone who can't be provoked, controlled, or broken. The world looks at you and senses something irreversible, a quiet force forged from humiliation, rebuilt in discipline, and crowned in silence. You don't need to speak anymore. The air bends. The silence that once condemned you has become your kingdom. They never saw it coming. The quiet was your weapon. While they roared and pointed, you listened. While they mocked your fall, you built your silence to something sharper than their noise. Now you stand in the same room, same faces, same eyes that once looked through. But something's changed. The air bends differently around you. The same silence that once buried you now wraps itself around them like judgment. You don't need to. The stillness says what words never could, that you endured, that you transformed, that you become something they can no longer reach. Once, your silence was mistaken for weakness. Now, it's mistaken for power. And that's the most poetic kind of revenge. They thought the noise of the world could drown you, but you became the echo that never fades. You don't need to prove them wrong because their existence already proves you right. They fill the space with nervous laughter, shifting eyes, a desperate need to escape the mirror you've become. You're calm, unnervingly calm. That's what unnerves them most. There's no anger left in you, no bitterness, just the kind of peace that only people who've been through war can wear on their face. You remember the nights of scraping yourself off the floor, whispering that maybe this was it. You remember betrayal, the ones who smiled as they watched you sink. But pain changes its shape over time. It becomes precision, it becomes patient. You learn to wait like a serpent in the dust, unseen but never asleep. You stopped shouting for justice and started mastering silence, learning the art of timing, the art of letting truth speak through your absence. Every scar on your body, every bruise on your soul, all of it was training for this moment. Now, when you speak, the room bends forward. Words fall from your mouth like ancient commandments. Not loud, not hurried, but final. You don't chase validation. You decide what's valuable by whether it survives your silence. And they feel it. Every syllable carries the weight of someone who's been burned, buried, and born again. They don't clap for you now, they freeze. Because applause would break the spell, and deep down they know. They're standing in the presence of someone who doesn't need it. You've learned that victory isn't the roar of the crowd. It's the moment they realize they can't touch you. Power isn't in what you say, it's in what you can hold back. And you hold everything back now. Your emotion, your explanation, your vengeance. That's control. The kind that terrifies people because it cannot be manipulated. You've become fluent in restraint, fluent in mystery. You've become the living embodiment of what happens when chaos learns discipline. The silence that once buried you has become your throne. Every betrayal, every rejection, every whispered insult, they forge the steel now coiled beneath your calm. You are not loud, you are deliberate. You don't move to prove, you move to remind. And as the room breaks into silence again, you realize this was never about revenge. It was about reclamation, about taking back the voice they thought they erased. You stand there breathing slow, eyes steady, heart unmoved. The storm that once destroyed you now obeys your command. You don't shout, you don't beg, you simply exist. And that's enough to make every guilty soul tremble. The room breaks into silence once more, and this time, it's not a verdict, it's reverent. You stand where chaos once ruled. The storms that once tore through your mind now bow in silence. Every scar on your body, every fracture in your soul, none of them vanished. They hardened into scripture. You no longer need to speak to prove anything. The world reads you now, line by line, like a prophecy it once ignored. You've become something language can't quite contain, a consequence wrapped in calm. The kind of silence that unnerves those who control you, because they can feel it, the shift, the stillness, the power. There was a time when you begged to be understood, when your truth felt too heavy for the room and your voice broke trying to explain your pain. But now you've learned, real power never argues. It waits, it watches, it builds in the dark until the light bends. You stopped chasing validation, and the moment you did, the world started chasing your silence. You realized the cruel truth. People don't listen to words, they listen to presence. And yours, sharpened by betrayal and rebuilt through solitude, speaks louder than any speech ever could. You became dangerous the moment you mastered your emotion. The same heart they called weak now beats with strategy. You no longer react, you calculate. You observe patterns, read faces, sense lies in the tremor of a breath. Betrayal became your teacher. Loss became your architect. Every person who broke you only revealed another layer of your armor. You learned to move through chaos like water fluid, unseen, unstoppable. And when they tried to pull you back into their noise, you smiled. Because now you understand, silence isn't absent control. Once you screamed for mercy. Now you whisper commands without moving The universe hears you. Time bends slightly and you act. You've learned the rhythm of restraint, the hidden pulse between chaos and calm. Where others seek applause, you seek where they talk, you listen. You've become the kind of person who can walk into a room and shift its energy without saying a word. Because silence, when earned, becomes a form of gravity. It draws everything unstable into. Your journey was never about winning. It was about becoming untouchable. Power doesn't come from dominance, it comes from detachment. The ability to walk away from anything that once controlled you. The courage to stay unshaken in the presence of noise. You became your own empire, brick by broken brick. You stopped needing to be seen and became impossible to ignore. What once destroyed you now kneels before you in memory. The past doesn't haunt you anymore, it reports to you. Now, as you stand in this stillness, you understand the final lesson. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what echoes through the silence after you're gone. The people who once doubted you will feel it. The weight of your absence, the precision of your calm, the echo of your transformation. You won't need to be remembered, you'll be felt. Like an old symbol carved in stone, not loud but eternal. The silence you once feared has become your language, your armor, your kingdom. And when the next storm rises, it won't find you trembling. It'll find you quiet, unmoved, watching. Because you've learned that the loudest verdict in this world isn't shouted, it's delivered in silence. And now, every time the room breaks into that same silence, it's no longer judgment, it's acknowledgement. The world has finally learned what you've known all along. Some souls were never meant to be heard, only felt.